Welcome back, and it's time to talk about the kidneys and the suprarenal or adrenal glands. So when we look at the kidneys, you notice the right one's a little bit lower than your left one because you've got the large liver sitting right on top of it. Now your kidneys we tend to think of as being the structures that are going to filter blood and produce urine to get rid of waste, and that is absolutely true, but they are also a very important endocrine structure. And your kidneys, as you can see from the slide, produce two particular hormones that we're going to focus on today. EPO, which is erythropoietin, and it's going to produce renin, which kind of triggers this renin-angiotensin kind of series of hormone changes. One of those cascades that you might have seen talked about in the crash course video. Now, erythropoietin triggers a process called erythropoiesis, which sounds like another big word to know, but it basically means it's going to trigger the production of more erythrocytes. So it's going to stimulate bone marrow to make more erythrocytes, which you also know as what? Yeah, red blood cells. Now, question before we move on to renin. You're constantly replacing old red blood cells. So you have red blood cells that are getting broken down and dying off on a pretty regular basis. And if you remember back when we talked about DNA, way back at the beginning of the semester, we watched a short video animation of DNA being read and producing proteins. And they talked about how you make literally trillions of hemoglobin protein molecules in your bone marrow every second. So you are constantly replacing these red blood cells. So that must mean then, logically, that you're releasing EPO on a pretty regular basis to replace those old red blood cells. However, there are times when you need to release more EPO than normal. Sorry about that short delay, just needed to kick the corgi out of the room. Okay, so as we said, EPO is going to be released on a pretty regular basis to replace red blood cells that you have dying off all the time. However, there are times when you need to release more EPO than normal. So my question to you is, why or when would you need to release more EPO than normal? To figure that out, you need to think about what do red blood cells do. So red blood cells do what? They carry oxygen. And why do you need to carry oxygen? So that you can make ATP, right? Now, if their job is to carry oxygen, why might you need more red blood cells? Because you need more oxygen, right? So what are some circumstances that could cause you to need more oxygen? So I want you to just kind of think about that for a minute. So pause the video right now and jot down a couple of different scenarios that you think might cause you to make and release more EPO than normal. Okay, hopefully you paused that for a minute to see if you could come up with any scenarios. I quizzed my daughter to see if she could come up with anything. And here's the list that we came up with. You could move to higher elevation where there's less oxygen in the air. You might have an injury that involves blood loss. You need to replace the blood that you lost. Now that could be an injury, or you could donate blood. If you donate a pint of blood, you're going to need to replace it. Or in the case of my mother, I used the example of her hip surgery where she lost over 1.5 liters of blood during the surgery. So she obviously is going to be releasing a lot more EPO after the surgery to replace all those lost red blood cells. If you are pregnant, you actually increase your blood volume significantly because you're carrying more oxygen to make more ATP both for you and for the developing embryo and fetus. If you start to exercise more, then that's going to cause higher energy demands. And I think that was pretty much our list. Did we come up with anything else? Okay, so that's a pretty good list to get us started. All right, how about renin? So as you were doing your research looking at the different hormones, you might have looked up a whole bunch of stuff that the renin cascade causes. Renin causes the production of angiotensin 1 and then angiotensin 2 and so on. The short answer is that renin increases blood pressure. So it's going to do that in a variety of ways. It's going to cause some vasoconstriction, although in certain circumstances it can cause vasodilation, so that can get a little bit confusing. But it can cause some vasoconstriction, so if I tighten up those blood vessels, then that increases pressure, right? You're putting your thumb over the end of a garden hose that causes the water to shoot farther. And it also increases cardiovascular activity. So that can also increase blood pressure. If I turn up the faucet and I'm putting more water through the hose, then pressure goes up. All right, so those are my primary kidney